and then just tell me when.
Okay, we're live.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the technical talk for, it's technically for the end of August, beginning of September. We'll have another talk at the end of this month, and I'll be sending out announcements for that shortly. Today's topic is documenting Wikimedia technical projects, and your speaker for today will be me, typically your host, but today you're your speaker. So my name is Sarah Rodland, and I'm a technical writer for the developer advocacy team at WMF. My professional career, I've been working for about over 10 years in open access and free and open software, free and open source software movements, both for and nonprofit organizations. I've worked mostly in operations and in technical writing positions throughout my career. My education is that I have a Bachelor's of Organizational Communication and Writing, and I have an MFA in Creative Writing in Poetry and Nonfiction. And the reason I like to share that is because that we do work in kind of a science technology field, and I just wanted to let people know that you do not have to have a science and technology degree to work in science and technology. I also have some academic background in composition and rhetoric, practical and research writing. I've taught classes in all of those things in the past. So the reason I wanted to do this talk is because in our technical community, better technical documentation is a consistent topic of discussion. This isn't just across Wikimedia or FOSS projects, it's across software in general. Devs and technical collaborators are looking for clear and concise information to help guide them as technical organizations mature. The need for really good technical documentation becomes more and more apparent and necessary. So we hear from collaborators in our movement that this is a need for them too. We have a really well-used tag in Fabricator for documentation that gets a lot of use. And our Toolforge surveys consistently cite the technical documentation needs improvement. And at every hackathon I go to, and in just in casual conversations with developers and technical collaborators across the movement, I hear that we need improvement. So the situation is that the foundation currently employs 2 dedicated technical writers. One's been here about 1.5 years, that's me, and we just brought a brand new technical writer aboard. And this is really a new area of concentrated focus for the foundation. I did want to acknowledge that there have been writers in the past who've worked on our projects and done really good work, and we always have really excellent technical writers in our community who work as volunteers. So what I wanted to do today is just take some time to talk a little bit about what technical writers and communicators are and what they do, how to get involved, share your skills, gain some experience. And then I also want to talk about some of our recent technical documentation that we have focused on for Wikimedia projects. So there'll be time after the talk for questions over IRC and on the YouTube live stream. And I'll add some, and at the end I'll have a slide that has links to those so that you'll be able to see those as well. So this is what I would call an ancient talk page. This is Newspaper Rock. It's in the Petrified Forest in Arizona. It's a rock with a bunch of pictographs on them made by ancient people that describe different parts of their world, the way it functions, probably just general graffiti. Since the beginning of time, humans have had a desire to share information, especially information about how things work and why. It's like the sun, the moon, the stars, why nature does this or that, how we were made, the wheel, fire, whatever needed explanation. This is all technical communication. It is the language of what and how, and it has been the hallmark of humanity forever. So if we fast forward in time, you'll find that our human drive to communicate, the what and the how, has not changed. Though scientific understanding and technology has evolved, The ancient pictograph creators are now technical communicators who facilitate and move information through many parts of an organization or movement. So in this talk, I'm going to use the words technical writer, technical communicator, documentarian pretty interchangeably. There are tons of different kinds of technical writers and communicators across science and technology. I'll be discussing mostly what individuals who work in software do. And then the other thing to note too is that the images that I use in this talk are all in the public domain, and when I post the talk, I'll have links to those in the as well. So basically, at their most basic, technical writers simplify complexity. They take complex ideas and they present them in a way that their audiences can understand. And I'll talk a little bit more about audiences later, but I really wanted to say that technical writers make things simple. Not to say that technical writers make everything simple. They make information more understandable and easier to replicate by an intended audience. So technical writers have several areas of coverage that you might be familiar with, and some that you may not. We typically, and I've broken this down to 3 categories. I think most people that think about technical writing think about technical writers as working on documentation, and that is a huge part of their job in software and technology. What a technical writer will do is often they'll document products, projects, processes, and progress for individuals working on technical projects, software developers, tool maintainers, newcomers, etc. So those will be in the form of different kinds of documentation, and I'll talk about those a little bit more later. Another job of the technical writer is communication. So what they may do is they may translate complex technical material into information that non-technical individuals can better understand. So this is a really important role for a technical writer because they exist at the intersection of a lot of groups inside the movement, and they're able to help facilitate communication on technical topics and help people understand things a little bit better. Another thing that technical writers or communicators might do is they might participate in consultation. So they may provide guidance and information for non-technical stakeholders to help them make decisions and communicate better with the technical community or partners or the general public. So when people are maybe working on something that they don't understand so well technically, a technical writer can help give them more information. They can also do they also often know the right questions to ask people who are working with technology, because a large portion of their job is to interview people and ask questions. So where do technical writers sit in an organization? In software, technical writers are typically found in engineering departments. So at WMF, they might be in the technical team or the product team. They're often part of a service team or a dedicated member of a team. So in our organization, technical writers are dedicated members of teams. I work for Dev Advocacy. Our newer technical writer will be working for Core Platform. In some organizations, it's a large group of writers who work and serve the groups as a team. They can also be found in marketing and communications, or sometimes even in sales or customer service. So in the last org that I worked in, I actually worked in the customer service team because I did a lot of work facilitating communication between our customer service reps, our institutional clients who were librarians, and then our developers who were creating products for those librarians. And so that made, that seemed like the best place for me to sit in that organization. So you may find technical writers anywhere. And so I have this little graphic up here, which is kind of just shows like where technical communication sits in the middle of a bunch of different teams and processes and ideas within our organization. Technical writers can see themselves kind of an interactive group that moves information through parts of an organization. It connects them together to make sure that the right parties are aware of the right information. And so I also think one of the things that you can think about is that technical writers are kind of conduits for information flow. They connect the dots for others. My big joke is I love being a technical writer because you kind of are also in the middle of all of the gossip. You know what's going on with different teams. You have a lot of information about what's going on in the organization, and you can be really helpful when you're sitting in the middle of all of that to help people connect people with each other and tell different stories. Sorry, that's if you guys hear that, I have a little mindfulness bell that just went off. So what do technical writers produce? So you have a technical writer in an organization, you know that they have different areas of coverage, you know that they sit as a nexus of communication between many different groups. What is their end product though? What do they make? So I wanted to cover some of the things that technical writers actually make and produce in the organization. So when you see them, you can say, oh, this is something a technical writer did. So again, I think our most typical idea of what technical writers do and is produce documentation. So when you're looking at how-tos or walkthroughs or tutorials, those are written by technical writers, whether they know they're technical writers or not. READMEs are technical writing. Any kind of help and support content, technical and design specs, project plans, system documentation, user manuals, API documentation, and so much more. Pretty much anything that's written, that's technical, that's helping to explain things to other people, that's going to be a form of technical documentation. Another thing that technical writers work on a lot that we might not really think about so much is they work on processes. So technical writers create and document processes. They spend a lot of time observing how things work, evaluating how they work, thinking about how they could work better or more efficiently. Sometimes they will create processes, sometimes they will oversee them and help others create them. They do a lot of troubleshooting. They ask things like, does this make sense? Does it work? If I follow this, can I do it again? They'll ask others to try and follow a process too. And then they write it down and they test it and they revise it. So just a huge portion of the role is thinking about how things function, how they work, how they process. I always joke that I'm a person who really just loves things fitting perfectly into things. And so for me, this is a really great role because working on process is one of those things where you can really smooth the path for other people and make things fit very well. And then another aspect, another thing that of technical communication is communication. So along with creating documents that help developers or technical collaborators, technical writers will often create documents that help other people understand what they're doing. So they may write technical blogs. They may manage social media geared towards devs, engineers, or just the general public so they understand what's happening. They may do things like review, give speeches or talks on technical topics like I'm doing now. They often will do seminars or webinars for large groups of people. If you're working in a for-profit organization, they'll do those for customers a lot of the time or for potential customers. Again, they'll work in marketing and outreach. And they also do customer help and documentation. One of the things that they also do that I didn't put on the slide and should have is they do a lot of communication around feature changes, incidents, and outages. So this is a place sometimes where development or technology and end users can really kind of collide a little bit. If there's an outage or an incident and people want to know why that happened, a technical writer can be really instrumental in helping people understand a little bit better how things happened, when they'll be back up again, or they can help communicate changes to features for people as well. So I'll go a little bit now into how technical writers decide what to write. I think that there's a misconception that technical writers just kind of say, I'm going to work on this thing, and then, or there's this thing I need to document, and then they just sit down and write. But there's actually kind of a process behind it, and there's a lot of thought that goes into what and how they decide to write. So one of the first things that technical writers think about, most importantly, is who their audience is. Um, everything that they do depends completely on the audience and who they've been asked to communicate with and how they want to convey it. Knowing the audience helps them know what is appropriate to share and how to share it. When a technical writer sits down to write, who is this for is among one of the first questions. What do they need to know? How do I share this message in a way that they will understand it? So for us technical writers, audience is always at the front of our minds. The next thing that we think about is the purpose. So along with the audience, we have to ask ourselves, why are we sharing this message? A lot of the time we are tasked with creating a piece of documentation. We're probably really annoying because we'll say, who is this for? Why am I writing this? And we'll ask this over and over again. But knowing the purpose right away and the reason for communicating will really help determine the format. And then typically, I think the purpose can be broken down into these four really basic categories: to learn, to achieve a goal, to understand, and to inform. And what you choose to create based on those will be a little bit different. To learn might be something like a walkthrough or a tutorial. That can also go into achieve a goal. If you want to do a very specific thing, you might also create a walkthrough or tutorial for that. To understand might be more explanatory. It might be the history of a thing. It might kind of walk you through different aspects of a certain thing. And then to inform might be more like reference material. So it might just be tables that you're looking at. You just need to look up very quickly. And so you have different purposes for the information that or you need to know the purpose in order to design the information for your audience. And then the other thing that we look at a lot or think about a lot is the context or the situation in which that writing is going to take place. So I always think that this is a little bit trickier to think about than audience and purpose. Often you know who you're writing for, you have a little bit of an idea, and the reason is pretty clear, but the context can be a little tricky. So I kind of like this I kind of like this imagery because it's really helpful in understanding that a little bit. So on the one side, you have some folks in having their hair done, and on the other side, you have a doctor explaining something to a couple of people. So we know that the context for the situation, the hair salon, is going to be different than the context of the doctor explaining information to. In my mind, I think it's a father and a daughter, but in your mind, it might be something else. And so we know that the context for the salon is going to be super informal, probably. And they may use a lot of slang with each other. They may talk back and forth. Like they may have a very easy conversation. So if you are a writer writing in that context, the kind of language, idioms, like things that you choose to talk in that situation are going to be very different than if you have the context where you have a doctor explaining medical information to a family. And so that helps drive the decisions that you make when you're deciding to write. So I always think about, when I sit down to write technical writing, I think about how yes, I have a message to convey. I have a certain audience of developers or engineers, but I also work in the context of this really big volunteer project that has a lot of history. And I want to keep in mind that there are constraints and rules in that community. And then I'm also limited by my tools. The tools that I use might be different if I were working in another kind of software. We tend to want to use free and open source software when we're working on movement work. So that's going to be a little bit different. That's going to contextualize things a little bit differently. Um, and then I think about things like, how am I going to design this so that others can come and work on it later? And then also, this volunteer movement has many, many languages and people at many different levels of, of, um, of English proficiency. So if I choose to write in English, the context of the English language, how am I going to write in a way that my audience can also translate that? So context can be very small and it can also be very big, but it's really important to think about when you sit down to any writing task. So this slide, I think, is a really good illustration of the writing process. Again, I think sometimes in our minds when we think about a technical writer, we think, oh, hey, they have a thing they're going to document. They sit down and then they just write it and then it's kind of done. And I think sometimes we do that when we're writing just things on Wiki where we might say like, oh, I just need to get this down and then it's published and it's done. With technical writing, there's a little bit more of a process. So what we do, a large portion of what we do that's not writing is we're planning. So we define that we have an audience, a purpose, and a context, and then we start to think about, now that we know we need to write a thing or create some communication, we begin to define requirements. We also conduct a lot of research. We do interviews and we'll outline the project. So this might actually take a much bigger slice of time than other parts of the project, even writing or drafting the project. So after we've planned and we feel like we're in good shape to get started, we will create an initial draft. And then I have a little feedback loop here because especially working on wikis, the review and publish can and are kind of circular feedback. They kind of move around. So typically after you create a draft, you'll review it, you'll test it, revise it. You might run it through other editors. You might run it through other writers to look at. And then you publish and share the content. So we know on Wiki that often we'll create an initial draft, we'll publish and share content. That's when it'll get reviewed, tested, and revised. Then we will work on it again. That's really like the benefit of having a huge group of volunteers and folks who can come in and make things better and better as they go along. The other part of the process that often gets neglected, but that we really need to think about is maintenance. So, often people will work on something and publish it, it'll be reviewed, it'll be up, and then it's done and they walk away. But another really critical part, especially in technical writing, is how do we maintain that documentation? How do we know that this is relevant and that this content will be sustainable for the future? And this is really something I think as a movement we need to work on better too, because I think a lot of times we do in the moment create and publish, and then we're not really revisiting until much later. So we talked a little bit about what technical writers are and their area of coverage, and then a little bit about how they process and how they work. And what I want to talk a little bit about is measuring the impact of technical writers. So Tom Johnson, he's a technical writer in the Bay Area, and he's pretty well known for writing a lot on the topic. And he says that the knowledge assets that technical communicators create have a value that can be hard to measure. So measuring impact is actually pretty difficult. There's not, at least right now, especially in the work that we're doing with the movement, is there's not really a metric or a number or a percentage. Uh, Tom Johnson also calls technical writing or knowledge the lifeblood of an organization. So we know it's important, but we just don't know always how to measure that importance. We can tell when something's bad or it's not working because people let us know that. If it's working, rarely do people write on a talk page and say, like, this documentation's great, I love it, never change it. And if it's bad, people don't usually say, like, this is bad, but the writing's really good. So it's a little bit hard to measure that. So instead of really thinking about impact in terms of numbers or percentages, or I tend to think of it more in what are the benefits of having technical writers and communicators working on projects. Uh, and I'm not a person who really likes to say it's good for the sake of good. So I like to think more about, well, what are the things that they do that we know are going to have a positive impact on our projects? So we know that they facilitate communication between groups of people. That's, inside WMF, between volunteers and staff, different kind of technical groups and people who are less technical. They help set standards and help keep documentation consistent. So one of the things that we're working really hard as technical writers at the foundation to do is to start to set some standards uh, and make it a little bit easier for people to know what are the best ways to write documentation, what are the ways that we can keep it consistent, so it's easier for others as they come along. Um, their work supports users at all levels and across all projects. So the work that technical writers do, it's for everybody. Um, and they close knowledge gaps for new people trying to participate in our projects. So I think that this is a really important one. That's why I put it in bold. Uh, Good technical documentation has the power to be an invitation to people. If people feel that they understand what they're looking at, or if they can follow instructions clearly, it gives them an opportunity to make entry into some of our projects that might be a little bit more difficult for them to join if they're not well documented. Another thing that it does is it reduces the one-to-one knowledge transfer between people. So it increases continuity of knowledge. And basically what I mean by that is, instead of having to go directly to a person and ask them, knowing that they may have information and they can help you, our hope is, with good technical documentation, that we're able to have that out in the open for everyone to look at, so that they don't have to keep going to the one person who knows. Or if the one person who knows leaves or decides to stop volunteering, um, they're able, there's still some continuity in the knowledge. Uh, so technical writers, I think that they add value rather than they take value. It's not going to hurt our projects to have more technical documentation. And that value, I think it produces more than it costs us to go through and document our steps and what we do. The other thing is, I call it increased audience satisfaction. And basically what this means is that when people visit our projects and they encounter communication that speaks to them, and they feel included, and they feel like they understand what's going on, they're going to be much more satisfied than if they encounter, say, a page that doesn't make sense, that they can't read very well, they can't translate into another language very well, or that they can't follow the steps, or the information doesn't work. That can really color their experience. Again, support cost, it saves time, and I think that goes back to that one-on-one knowledge transfer. And then it reduces training and development costs, and then just overall cost of information development. So we know the better documentation we have, the less we have to develop, the less cost it is for the organization and for our donors. So I talked a bunch about what technical writers do, what their benefits are, kind of a little bit how they work. And I just want to talk about how you can grow as a technical writer. So one of the things that I like to tell people is that, if you've ever written any instructions, any directions, if you've ever written a README or contributed to one, you are already a technical writer. So you have already taken the first step. I think we all are a little bit technical writers, but you definitely have started to do the work. And if you enjoyed it or you want to learn more, you should definitely try to gain some experiences and skills. So here's my list of useful skills to have. It's kind of a long list, and you don't need to have all of them, but these are things that you can work on. So the top skill that I would say you need as a technical writer or communicator is compassion and empathy. I know that this isn't something that we always talk about a lot in the technical field, but as a technical writer and communicator, you're going to constantly be talking with people, asking questions, and trying to communicate a message to groups of people that you might not understand very well. And one of the things that you need to be able to do is empathize with them and understand what their situation is and why they might need the information that you're sharing and how you would share that. So, in terms of the work we do, I do actually think this is the top skill that you can have. The other skill that you would want is the ability to collaborate with others online and in person. I think in the movement, we have people who are very good at doing this. So yeah, you're already there. And then writing and editing skills, I wanted to put a note here that you don't need to be perfect at this. I know that there are a lot of people that pride themselves in being great writers or great editors. Uh, but we all make mistakes. We're not perfect. We're all learners. And so this isn't actually something you should worry about too much. This is something that you can work with collaborators, that you can learn as you go. We all have different quirks in our writing that we can kind of work on and play with and learn from. Interviewing and research skills. The ability to learn. So if you do technical writing, you're going to be working with so many different people and technologies, and there are going to be days when you feel like, I understand all of this, and there are going to be days when you encounter completely new concepts that you have to figure out very quickly, because it's your job to make sure that other people who don't understand those concepts will understand them better. The flip side of that is that you have to be comfortable with not knowing things, and you have to be comfortable or not understanding things, and you have to be comfortable verbalizing that as well. So, as a technical writer, there's no faking it till you make it. You really have to be able to say, I don't understand this concept. Please help me understand at a very low level how this works, or I want to understand this better. On this list, I also have some other skills in terms of different kinds of languages, programming, design programs, things that you might want to learn or know. Again, just like writing and editing skills, these are all things that you don't have to be perfect at. You don't have to know all of this before you can become a technical writer. These will vary between all the projects you're working on. You may be using totally different tools in totally different projects. If you're working in free and open source software, or if you're working in proprietary software, the tools could be very different. So, just get started is what I would say, and start working on a little bit at a time. At the very bottom that I have here is understanding of agile software development process. And I will just kind of say, without going too far, that if you're a writer, this is going to be really natural for you, because part of the job of a writer is to write and then rethink and write again, and to write and rethink and write again. And so you're constantly moving, getting things better, thinking about what will work in that moment, what's going to work just in time for this thing. And so as writers, this is a really natural area to work in. So I'll have what to study here. So again, I think in my first slide I said, I have an MFA in creative writing. I don't have a technical degree. It can be useful, and if you decide to study technical writing or computer science, you know, I just want you to think about that a little bit, that there are different routes and different ways to get here. If you are working on a degree, computer science or writing or communications is really good. There are technical writing certification programs. I have in the US here just because that's my area of knowledge. I'm not sure what's available globally. So that might be if you have a degree already and you want to add an extra certificate to it. There's a group in the US called STC, which is the Society for Technical Communication, which is kind of big for technical writers and communicators here. And they also do a certification too. But I'm going to say, like, Wikiversity has a great technical writing program that you can look at. It's a good start. You can learn a lot from it. I definitely reference it a lot myself. And there are plenty of online classes and groups and things like that that you can join. And then the best thing that you can do is really gain experience. So you can work on technical documentation for open source projects. You can work on Wikimedia or MediaWiki projects. You can work on other FOSS projects. GitHub is a great place to explore. There are outreachy internships that we work with specifically at the foundation, and the last few of ours have been focused around technical writing. We're just working on Google Season of the Docs. I'd encourage you to look that up as well. That's also an internship program that folks can work directly with technical writers at Wikimedia and other organizations to help make their projects better. And then I also have Write the Docs here as well, which is also a worldwide meetup group for people who are interested at all levels of the field. It's very open, it's very radically inclusive, so it's a great place to get started if you're trying to learn. And then I also have a link here to some outstanding tasks. I said earlier as well that our Fabricator board, we have a documentation tag and it's huge. So you can always browse through that. You can always ask questions. You can always reach out. And our resources are starting to get better and better for this. And so with the time that I've left, what I want to do is just talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing specifically to improve documentation on Wikimedia projects. So basically, I want to say the first thing that we've done, number one, is that Wikimedia has started to recognize that technical documentation is a very important aspect of engagement for technical collaborators, especially new and potential technical collaborators. So I think that's really important, just acknowledging that this is a big thing. This is something that we need. It's an important aspect of reaching out to our collaborators and being a part of a community. And then just also acknowledging that we have a need and there's a value for having some professional technical communicators on staff to help. So in the last year and a half, we recently added 2 full-time technical writers, one in dev advocacy, that's me, and then again, a new writer that we have on core platform. So we have been making changes, and we should be seeing changes coming along. So, we understand that teaching, mentoring, and learning from new technical documentarians is as important as simply creating technical documentation for software developers. And our ethic is that our work is done in community. So we try to do as much of the work of technical documentation in community with volunteers or with interns or with members of our technical community. And so in the last year, we've done a lot of work to update our technical documentation style guide. We're partnering with Google Season of the Docs right now with an intern who is further improving those resources, and we should see more of those coming out in the next couple of months. She's done some really great work, and I'm super excited about that. This last year, we worked with Outreachy to update and refresh MediaWiki Action API documentation. So that was really cool too. We were able to work with a few interns on this and have a few rounds with this. And so the MediaWiki Action API documentation has been greatly improved over the last year. We've partnered with academic institutions and student writers to evaluate and improve technical documentation and Wikimedia projects. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. And then we've also attended a lot of conferences and hackathons and write-a-thons, and we brought tasks for documentation to writers at varying levels. So we've been working with writers in the community to see what they're interested in, and also to kind of gather some of their help to work on some of these projects. And then one of the big things we did too is we rebooted the technical talks, which is what I'm doing right now, just to provide another forum for the technical community to document and share information. Oh, hello. And then we're currently working on a couple of initiatives to better partner with the technical community and improve technical documentation globally across Wikimedia projects. For the past year or so, we've been working on technical writing special interest group. I personally have enjoyed it because we've been able to surface a lot of issues, but I'd like to see a little bit more engagement from the community. We have a lot of staff on that SIG, and so one of the things that we'll be looking at in the next couple of quarters is changing that to something we're calling Friends of the Docs. That's a little bit more open, hopefully, and has a little bit more community engagement. And then we're also focusing now on some more of our technology that the community works with quite a bit, which would be Wikimedia Cloud Services and specifically Toolforge documentation, and then Cloud VPS documentation. So we do an annual survey, and our users consistently identify a desire for better documentation for these services, and so we're focusing on that now. And I'm going to go over Toolforge improvements super quickly because, yeah. So I just want to drill down a little bit and look at a really specific content collection we're working on, which is Toolforge. Again, it's something that the community's expressed a need for consistently for better documentation. And we did start some early efforts in 2017. And this is part of our working with community effort. We did an audit of the technical documentation with some graduate students at Boise State. And what this resulted in was a set of global recommendations for improving the organization and quality of content on that content collection. And then we used this page views tool, which basically allows us to see which pages are being most visited, and it helps us understand which has the most traffic, and then it helps us prioritize which ones to improve first. We did this as well when we did the work on the MediaWiki Action API, because our resources are really limited. We just kind of have to determine what is getting the most visits and the most visibility, and start working there first. And that seems to be a pretty successful strategy for us. So the first phase of this is just working on developer maintainer documentation. This is really the documentation that all the technical collaborators who work in Toolforge are using the most, and these are the pages that see the most traffic on Wikitech. So if you think all the way back to the beginning of the talk, where I talked about audience, context, and purpose, this is kind of our quick way of defining those before we start writing. If we're doing a fast or quick writing task, or really just sitting down to write in the moment, or have kind of an overall strategy for writing, we'll create these developer stories. And this helps us, these small snippets help us determine who our audience is and who their needs are. So for Toolforge documentation, we sat down and decided on these developer stories. And I'm not going to read them all right now, but these are basically very quickly who's using using Toolforge, what their experience is, and what they want to know. And from that, that'll help us drive what we're going to change. And then, because we don't have a lot of resources for user research or really like a deep understanding of our audience at this point, one of the things that we want to do is do some overall changes that are kind of global best practices. And then once we get those in place, then what we'll do is we'll be able to have some better documentation, or some cleaner documentation that we can start testing with audiences. So I'm going to go through these super quickly. These are the things that we're looking at when we're doing the initial improvements to Toolforge. And these are things that you should start to see changing on Wikitech in the next, they have been changing and they will be changing as we're moving forward. So one of the things that we look at site organization, we just look to see, does it have the same sidebars, nav bars, footers? Are the recurring links the same? Is the site consistent? Can people find their way through it? Is like content grouped with like content? When we started this project, I made a map of what Wikitech looks like. And we can see that some of the information is siloed in different places. And so one of the goals of the improvements is to change those silos. The other thing that we are looking at is page organization. This is something that we hope filters across all the projects documentation, which is just that users will have a consistent experience between the pages, and that pages follow a consistent template that suits the purpose of the content. So this is something that we did with the MediaWiki Action API documentation. We determined a template that was going to be consistent across those pages and easy for the audience to navigate. And we're doing the same with Wikitech as well. And then we want to just make sure that all of the elements of the page are the same. And then we think about readability. So we want to make sure that style and tone are consistent across everything, that the language is simple. I won't go into this now, but there's this idea of a Flesch-Kincaid score. We want to keep that kind of low so that we can make sure that users can translate it or understand it. And then we want to make the sentences short and concise. So a lot of the work of improving Toolforge documentation is just simplifying language. And then we want to think about memorability. So we want to make sure that the content is organized and written in a way that aids long-term memory and learning over simple reference. One of the things that we don't want is we don't want users' experience of the documentation to be quote unquote bad, because that's really going to be their memory of the documentation as opposed to what the content is. And so it's really important to create a good user experience so that they're prepared to remember and hold on to that material. And then we are looking to see if the content is still relevant and correct. And if it's not, we want to correct that. We want to or we want to remove any outdated or irrelevant information and fix what, and then change it if we need to. And then the last thing, which is a challenge, and I'm definitely thinking through and would love to hear a lot of thoughts on, is once this documentation is in place, how do we make it maintainable and consistent over time? It's not something that we just want to create and then leave. We want to make sure that it's something that is in a good place, and that the community can continue to maintain it for as long as it needs to be maintained. So our next steps are finishing the improvements, the initial round, doing user testing for accuracy and readability, thinking about if it fits user needs. We want to look at the UX and design also for better readability. Can we change the page structure? How do we create it in a way that it aids readability and serves the content better? And then we want to think about continuous improvements. How do we maintain the technical documentation and make sure it stays high quality? And then the next phase of Toolforge documentation will be working on administrator documentation. So this will be another part of Wikitech. You can follow improvements here. I have a couple of links. I'll post these afterwards for folks to look at. And then it is time for questions. And I have a slide that has links to the YouTube stream and all of that. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't see any questions right now.
Awesome.
But I would like to say that I learned a lot about technical writing there that I will definitely use in my job. So thanks.
Awesome.
maybe we can give it 30 seconds or so to see if anyone has any questions before we shut it
Wrap
down.
it up. Perfect.
Yeah. Subu says he had a meeting conflict, but he will be watching the recording.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Oh, and I should also mention, feel free to reach out to me, either an IRC or you. I really think on everything. So if you can find me and you want to ask me a question, it's totally fine. You can email me. You can get me an IRC. You can get me in Hangouts if you have my Hangout. I'm also on Telegram and a couple other. I'm on Zulip as well. So, I guess staying true to being a technical communicator, I just want to be everywhere. But if people have questions, or I think especially about how can they participate, how can they join in, how can we better support people, because that's I think in my mind, having our community really feel supported in doing the work of technical documentation, that's really big. So you don't hesitate to ask questions. You can also send general questions to Wikitech L. We monitor that too, and we're happy to answer anything.
Cool. So we had a couple questions pop up. So Diego
Okay.
asks, what would be the main difference between technical writing and academic paper writing?
Oh, well, I think the basic elements are the same. So I would actually say, probably, I'm thinking about this on the fly. When you think back to that, I call it like a rhetorical framework, that audience, context, and purpose, they're going to be different. So that's going to change the way that you decide to write. So your audience is going to be academics, probably not developers. The context is going to be in an academic environment. And Diego, you're probably pretty familiar with with that. Like there's a whole other context to that, and so your writing's going to change based on that kind of rhetorical framework. But the basics of writing and communication are the same across whatever field you're working in. So that's why you see a lot of creative writers doing technical writing for careers later on, or working on content, or teaching, or even writing or presenting academic papers. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it looks like he followed up and his question was in terms of writing style. So I think that addressed that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then someone on YouTube says, thoughts on simple Wikipedia or Wiktionary?
Are they, I guess I would need to have a follow-up question with that. Are they saying in terms of language, in terms of technical documentation, or style? Uh, Basically, what I think more specifically, what they want to know.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll see if they follow up on that. They say, in terms of language, do they share the same goals?
You know, I'm going to do the technical writer thing where I'm going to say, I'm not sure I know enough about the specific projects to know. But I will say, in terms of our overall goals as I think Wikimedia projects, um, I will always favor more simple language just because we have such a wide audience. But I imagine that our projects have very specific audiences or specific groups of users that use them. And so that's kind of my short and long answer. But I think I don't have enough deep knowledge of those two particular projects to provide a super comprehensive answer.
All right. So I think that's all our questions.
Well,
Here.
awesome. Well, thank you, everybody, and I'll post all of these slides to the Tech Talks page, and then if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I will try to answer them for you. And then I'll be announcing our Tech Talk for later in the month. I actually think it is Diego that's doing that talk, and then also I really invite folks to do a tech talk themselves. This is doing it today myself has been really informative, and I want to think about some structural changes to how we do them or give more options for people. But this isn't only a staff thing. This is also for community, everyone in the community, and I want to make sure that people feel supported, that they're able to share information if they want. So I'm definitely here if you have questions about tech talks or you're thinking about doing them. Even at just thinking, feel free to reach out and we'll try to work something out. So that's my spiel.